Welcome to the Dreamboat. Remember, you can join the DRI for just £30 a year. You get access to more content, including videos and discounts for our events. It's a great way of finding out more about our work, joining our dream community, and supporting this podcast. Details in the show notes and at driccpe.org.uk/membership. Welcome to the Dreamboat podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy, all you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Dave Billington, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm also director of the Dream Research Institute. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist Laura Payne.
Hello, I'm Laura Payne, and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute. And we're called the Dreamboat because we are recording our podcast overlooking the beautiful canal barges here at Little Venice in London.
We'll be looking at dreams, talking to guest experts, and answering your questions.
Now, let's get on with the episode. We've decided to call this episode Death is But a Dream, from a famous quote, life is but a dream. And we spent a while trying to work out, like everybody else, we made the mistake that it was Shakespeare that said it. But actually, many people think it came from Edgar Allan Poe, the poet, the American poet. Anyway, in Death is But a Dream is a very interesting look at the dreams of the dying. And we are going to talk with a fascinating doctor who's behind the outstanding research into the dreams of the dying, Dr Christopher Kerr. He works out of a remarkable hospice in Buffalo, upstate New York, where he and his team have studied what they call end-of-life experiences, or ELE'S, which incorporate both end-of-life dreams and end-of-life visions, and the results are quite amazing. Dave, you were lucky enough to interview Dr. Kerr, who is both CEO and Chief Medical Officer at the hospice. What did you think?
Well, it was a lovely conversation, and the results of the research are absolutely fascinating. I think, as with all good research, it brings up ever more interesting questions that need to be answered as well. But it's a really unique set of research. Just to look at some of the results that they came up with. I'll read this from the published work from the hospice. ELE'S, end-of-life experiences, provide the dying with comfort as they move closer to the end of life. Some patients will experience an increase in personal strength or a deeper spiritual connection. They may feel positive emotions such as happiness, excitement, animation, or a sense of nostalgia. And in fact, many patients look forward to experiencing their next dream or vision. And most importantly, and we do talk about this in the interview, because ELEs can be so comforting for dying patients, they also have a profound effect on loved ones. End quote. That really seems to be a key part of it. And I think it sounds like they've got excellent care at this hospice in Buffalo, where they're really paying attention not only to the needs of the dying, but also their carers and their loved ones and their families, and noticing how these dreams have an effect on everyone involved.
Yeah, I think that's often the work of hospices, but to actually go into more detail about what the dying person is experiencing must be comforting all around. I understand there were some common themes as well that have come up for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the ones they mentioned are a sense of comfort, preparing to travel somewhere, which I think with our symbolism hats on is really interesting. Watching or engaging with the deceased, and you'll hear Dr. Kerr talk about that. Loved ones waiting, it's very much in the same realm, and loved ones includes people who've passed on before. It includes old pets sometimes, and it's different things for different people at different stages of life that people are dying at as well. Sometimes there's past traumatic life experiences. He talks a little bit about this, about how there's the opportunity sometimes to revisit some trauma and kind of move through it and let it go before dying. And that very much ties into the other thing, which is unfinished business.
Yeah. I mean, quite remarkable, really, if you think about it, because, again, how the psyche is processing, even at the end of life, arguably the next greatest journey there is, whatever your belief structure might be. I'm intrigued also about loved ones waiting, because people who've had near-death experiences usually report that when they go down the tunnel of light, that's what they see is loved ones waiting. So it's interesting that this has actually come up in the dreams of the dying. I think it all sounds incredibly special. I understand that Dr. Christopher Kerr's work is part of a 6-part documentary series on Netflix called Surviving Death. And Death is But a Dream, which is what we're going to call this episode. Is the title of his book, which the full title is Death is But a Dream, Finding Hope and Meaning at Life's End. And sounds absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, and he's done a TED Talk on the subject, which you should be able to find online. But we'll play in the interview now, and just to set it up, because there were some interesting circumstances around the recording, because Dr. Kerr was recording his end of the conversation in Buffalo, New York, where he lives. There had just been an absolutely massive storm the day before. They'd lost all power, and he had somehow managed to get a generator online, and he joined the call with a virtual link. And then partway through, his power came back on, and it reset all the switches on his computer and all the settings. And so you'll see there's a significant change in sound quality partway through. So we're going to play in the first part of the interview, which you should be able to hear really clearly. For the second part, we may need to come in and say a few things for the unclear parts of the interview, but we'll do a wrap up at the end as well. All right, so here is the original interview with Dr. Kerr. I'm speaking with Dr. Kerr, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Medical Officer at Hospice and Palliative Care, Buffalo. Dr. Kerr, welcome to the Dreamboat.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. You and your team have studied the nature and impact of end-of-life experiences, including surveying the dreams of the dying. And I'm wondering what originally motivated you to start this work?
It's been an interesting journey. It was in 99, I found myself here at Hospice just moonlighting and really not trained on how to care for the dying. And it was my colleagues who were bring me to the bedside to show me that there was this other aspect, the dying we see, and then there's the one that's experienced by the patients, which included these end-of-life experiences. And I didn't understand them, but I knew they were inherently comforting and therapeutic. And when I tried to teach it, everyone said, well, there's no evidence for it, kind of thing, skeptically. So that's what started the research, was just really out of a frustration that this mattered to the patient, therefore it should matter to the doctor.
Okay. And I was reading in some of your work that there are some cultural antecedents around the world, that this has been noted in other cultures and other places before. So did you discover that after you'd started to do this work?
Yeah, and it's been fascinating. There's nothing new in what we've done. It's just basically shine a light on something that's been lost.
Okay.
In fact, we're working on a documentary film with the indigenous people of the Amazon and the Australian outback. This has always been part of the human experience. It's just with our zest to medicalize the dying process from a human experience, we've kind of lost sight of that there's other dimensions to the dying.
Well, that's really interesting. Is there anything you're able to say about the work you're doing in Australia right now? Is there anything you've discovered?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been done with Lynette Walworth, who's won 3 Emmy Awards. She does virtual reality at a high level, and she's combining kind of these more pure belief systems in other cultures coupled with our Western research. And then she's putting the subjective experiences to image. So it's been very interesting.
I was going to go back to the beginning of your work and just ask you a little bit about how did you go about the research and how did you go about investigating dreams and visions of the dying?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. We knew that for it to have any validity, we had to put it in language that the skeptic would appreciate. So we took a doctor's more scientific view to it, and we did university-approved studies. We controlled for things like confusion or delirium, medication, etc. We filmed patients. Because dying is a process, we interviewed them daily with standardized questionnaires. So we put statistical analysis to it. We also had qualitative interviews. So we put a lot of rigor. And in their first study, there were hundreds, almost 500 interviews when done daily. So we really took some objectivity, and we weren't trying to interpret this to the afterlife or the paranormal or religious. We were just looking at dying as a mystery to itself. And to participate in survey on a daily basis, you got screened for confusion, so you had to be intact. And that's where the film is so valuable, because you can see they look and sound like you and I. And, we were not talking about the moments before death where people are clearly deoxygenated. We were talking about upstream by several weeks, sometimes months.
Okay.
And that's how we went about it.
And how do you define dreams versus visions versus hallucinations? What's the difference for the layperson?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. The one thing we hear from our patients is these aren't dreams. I don't normally remember my dreams. They're not fantastical. There's not metaphor. They don't require interpretation. They tend to be focused on relationships. So if you lost your mother when you're a child and you see your mother, that doesn't need a translation. And they're very different than near-death experiences. People aren't given work to do or great epiphanies. They tend to be focused more purely on really felt love. And the people who are included tend to be people who loved the individual unconditionally and secured them, and the people who didn't are excluded. When we measure realism on a scale of 1 to 10, it's 10. So hallucinations are very different. That's kind of thought disorder. That's an unshared reality. That's very different. It's funny. Patients would say that when we asked whether they were asleep or awake, it was about 50-50. Yet you walked into the room. So if you were awake and seeing something, that would be categorically a vision. Except when we walk in the room, we didn't see them generally like that. So we're not sure if they're vivid dreaming or what's happening, because sleep cycle and sleep architecture is so destroyed in the dying process, right? So we're not sure. So I'm not a dream scientist by any means. It's just interesting. We're more comfortable with the term end-of-life experiences because our patients went so far out of their way to tell us these weren't
right,
dreams.
Which is interesting in itself.
Yeah. And they're very different than dreams. I mean, these are played out events. These are recalled with absolute clarity. They feel lived is what we hear most often. They feel virtual. So people really go to great lengths to tell us these aren't dreams.
And so what changes about these experiences as people are approaching the end of life?
Well, that's a great question. So we looked at categories and content and comforture. And thematically, kind of what happens is the closer you get to the dying, the more likely you are to see those you've loved and lost. And that, interestingly, by category, that's associated with the highest level of comfort. So seeing that as you get closer to dying, you're more likely to be reconnected or made whole by being brought back or in proximity to the feeling of love you had for somebody who you lost, who was very important in your life. And what that does, it tends to do, is it validates the fear. it validates the life that was led and reduces the fear of dying. And we looked at, we did a study where we looked at dying as post-traumatic growth, and within a negative experience, could there actually be growth? And we found people who were having these experiences, which was really almost 90% of people we interviewed and surveyed, they were learning and adapting and gaining insight right up until the very end. So it's this paradox, right? They're physically diminishing and lessening, but spiritually and psychologically they're vibrant and growing, and that's what these experiences tend to do.
So, what makes the dreams of the deceased, or those dreams of the deceased, comforting? Is it just the presence of those people who have passed on before? Is it the subjective feeling that the dying person has towards them, or are there specific messages being given?
Yes, great question. I think you have to combine a couple of data points. So the fact that this feels profoundly real to the dreamer, and they're also they carry it with them into wakefulness. So it feels like a happening at a time when they could feel lonely and isolated within dying. So they feel as though the person that they loved was never gone. So you have a 95-year-old man who lost his mother when he was 5, but he smells her perfume. He hears her say, "I love you," and he feels hugged. And he no longer distinguishes realities. It's so virtual to him that it's like a happening. So he doesn't feel isolated and he doesn't feel alone. And it's just so deeply meaningful that their perspective changes. And what we see more often than not is we don't see fear and dying and fighting the dying of the light kind of thing. People are fighting to get towards what they were experiencing. So it's common that they'll say, I want to go back to sleep. So it's the vividness, it's the realism, it's the depth of feeling. All of those things invert what we see as observers as this horrific dying process. They're experiencing this depth of warmth and love that I don't think we can understand. And the children too, right? We have a large pediatric program and we've studied the children. It's the same thing. But they may not know a person, but they'll know a pet.
Right.
And they don't make the distinction.
And you've written about how those experiences are meaningful and comforting for the dying, but also for the families and caregivers of the people who are approaching the end of life.
We published several papers on that. About 750 bereaved have been interviewed or surveyed. And basically what's good for the patient is good for their loved one. As you can imagine, it inverts this idea of dying as finality and empty to something of a continuance. So it kind of connects lives, whether living or dead. So if you've got a couple who've been together for 6 decades and they lost a child, let's say, and the person in the bed is re-experiencing the presence of the baby they lost, that does more to validate the living, the life, than it does to deny it. And so they're as moving as the patients themselves to hear from the patients and families. This is one of the reasons we did this work, was it's so commonly reported by observers of the dying, yet it's not been given any context or validation.
Yeah. And so what's it like for you and your team to talk to people about their end-of-life experiences? Has it changed you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not by disposition drawn to anything of this nature at all. I have an aversion to this sort of stuff. But it leaves you with a sense that there's a more hopeful story, and that those are gone are not lost. And I'm struck by the richness and recall of an re-experience of feeling that may not have been proximate to you for decades. because time seems to vanish, and you focus on those very important relationships, and sometimes they're with your pet from when you were a little boy or girl. It's just always there for you, and I think that's lovely.
Yeah, yeah, that's really powerful. I'm wondering as well if it has changed the way that you care for the dying, or the way that you support and advise families and caregivers as well.
Yeah, very much. And that's one of our, I think, our roles, which is to make sure again that dying isn't as isolating, giving permission and space for these sort of things to be acknowledged, and to bring in family who may be off put by somebody sharing a reality they don't, and by telling them no, that this is normal, and get closer to the bed and ask questions, um, which is, it's a wonderful role. Um, to bring people, because you're a child and your parent is talking and you don't see what they see. They immediately assume it's drugs or confusion or brain mets or whatever, and it's great to see people reconnect instead.
Yeah. Now you've talked about the presence and the visiting the images, the visions of the people who have died before. Are there any other themes that have been present in and that you've noticed?
Travel is really common. Preparing to go, it's about a third of people. Pets are very common. Again, a source of unconditional love. I'm struck by who's not included. So it might be one parent and not the other, one sibling, not the other, one spouse, but not the others. So it's really, it tends to focus again on the health of the dynamic between the dreamer and those in the dream. Very little is said in these dreams, but everything is understood and felt. It's like words transcends words. I think it's beautiful that they don't include these rich contexts and dialogues, or meanings. They just know by the presence of the person. I think there's about 12% who have discomforting dreams, but those are some of the most transformational. We've had people who've had survivor's guilt from war, and they've suffered with PTSD for decades, and finally at the end of their life they're comforted by the return of the soldiers that were lost. Things like that. Everyone's has wounds from having lived, sadness, regret, guilt. Those things, dying doesn't deny the reality of those things, but it tends to make them. There's this final justice where people seem to feel better from them. So negative does not mean they don't have value.
Right.
So I think that's fascinating.
That is fascinating. Yeah, that certainly aligns with my work and my co-hosts' work as psychotherapists. We would see that negative doesn't mean that it's not helpful in some way, something to grow through in that.
Yeah, actually, some of the most meaningful ones we've experienced, and we have them on film, is along those lines.
So, is there anything that has surprised you about what you've found in terms of the themes or the other experiences that you've discovered?
In terms of surprise, I'm always stunned by the fact that we tend to experience things with a perspective of time and distance, and that's not true for people at the end of their life. So I'm just always to look at a guy who's in his 9th decade of life, and he's recounting experiences from early childhood with clarity and full sensory experience. Really changes memory. The other thing that I'm so impressed by is people who are cognitively different, like who have dementia, and who we, unfortunately, medically, we talk in terms of their deficits. Yet they have rich emotional histories and experiences, and those, they aren't denied these. In fact, they do them in very interesting and vivid, profoundly vivid ways. And I think that's wonderful. So because you can no longer do serial sevens or tell us who the last three presidents were doesn't mean that you didn't love someone and marry somebody and raise a child and all those things. And those often come to surface at the end. In ways like children that are, there's a disinhibition. So they're shared and experienced in a pure form. And the message is the same, though, that they're loved and they're not alone. So I think that's wonderful. I think that's part of the basis of terminal lucidity, is all these memories rekindle. Just like the right song can rekindle awareness and wakefulness. It seems to happen with people who may have advanced dementia.
That's fascinating.
They're not denied this, and I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, and there's so much in that is very, very comforting for those of us who are alive and hope to be for a little longer.
Yeah. The other thing is that there's this lack of religious symbolism. It's and we're not the only ones to report this, and this is seen cross-culturally. But I don't think we live theology in those terms, but the tenets of faith, of forgiveness, and of love are pretty universal for this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. There's been some other work. In fact, we talked to a dream researcher named Christian Gericke a little while ago, and he was talking about themes anthropologically, themes of images of dogs and birds seem to appear around dreams of the dying that were reported in other cultures. And I was wondering if you'd seen more of those sorts of themes as opposed to, as you say, religious symbolism.
So interesting you brought this up, because one of the projects we're doing with a gentleman who's a chief in the Amazon, he's also this brilliant artist. So just to reset it a bit, we publish case reports, and in my book, we describe several children who may not know a person who's died, but definitely know of somebody's pet who has died, theirs, whatever. And he shows this beautiful picture of a child after death in a boat going on her journey. And it inverts, and in the reflection in the water is the dog. And it just sent a shiver down my spine, because we see this. And I said to him, "That's fascinating." He goes, "Oh yeah, the kids always take their dog with them." But to see it done in a painting the painting is stunning. Very, very common. Yeah, and there's a beautiful, wonderful chaplain named Carrie Egan, who's written about this beautifully, about when she works with the dying. And it was a piece she wrote called What Do the Dying Say, or whatever. It was made at The Wire, CNN. And she makes this beautiful argument: this is our first and last classroom of God is really our family, and that's where we live our lives. And our greatest accomplishment is our relationships, and that's how. Not in deep theologic terms, but in terms that are rooted in our relationships.
Well, that's brilliant to hear, and is moving and fascinating. I'm aware that we're out of time, so we'll have to end there. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, and good luck with the power outages and so on. I hope that's not a continuing problem.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks again. Take care.
Well, what stunning and beautiful work. To be able to record and interview the dying sounds like a real privilege, and it's clear that Dr. Kerr and his team work in a very discreet and, I suppose, a respectful way with it all. I was particularly fascinated by the recurring imagery that they found, and I wondered what you made of that, Dave.
Yeah, I have to say there was a lot that seemed really familiar in that, and not from my personal experience, but in the interviews that we've done, the people that we've spoken to, certainly from therapy practice and working with dreams, hearing about the loved ones that are being met. So I was really interested as well to hear about the dogs, the pets that were present, particularly for children who maybe didn't know an adult or another person who had passed on before, but children who were facing the end of life, and how that was in their experience in the hospice, but also then this man that he spoke to in the Amazon who had painted a picture. And in the picture, there was a dog in the boat. And it reminded me of, as I think I said to Dr. Kerr, that reminded me of when we spoke to Christian Gericke. He was talking about birds and dogs being present in end of life dreams, and something that he'd had direct experience of when his wife passed on as well. So, how about you? What were the themes that stood out for you?
I was, again, like you, really struck by the presence of pets, particularly birds and dogs. They are such an ancient symbol of of basically life after death, or psychopomps, as the Egyptians and the Greeks would call it, of a figure or an animal that comes from the underworld where the dead are to speak to those in this plane of existence. To see that actually being mirrored, these old sort of folklore tales and myths being actually mirrored in the experience of the dying, I found very fascinating, I must admit. And also the notion of traveling in dreams. I know we've often talked about the psyche and the big S self being expressed by being in a vehicle of some kind traveling. To have that, possibly the last journey that we know we're going to make, being echoed in both visions and end of life experiences, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, Dr. Kerr is very cautious, and he's really taking a scientific approach. And it sounds like they work with people of all different kinds of cultures and backgrounds. And he's again reached out to work with people in Australia and in the Amazon, and the different cultures that are involved. And it's really fascinating to hear that for most people, it's not kind of like classic religious icons that are coming up, or classic recognizable religious signs. Uh, Yet there's this sense of the dreams being in some way spiritual, and that they connect to something beyond yourself, and that there's a real purpose to these dreams. They're about soothing that transition out of life. They're about comfort for the dying person. They're about comfort for the people around them, and how important that is. And I really like it, maybe because it agrees with the way that I try to look at things, where it doesn't have to be, doctrinal or any one particular perspective. And yet, you can open yourself up to really interesting different ways of seeing things, and different experiences that don't necessarily have a single unifying explanation for all of them. But there's an evolutionary and a biological side to that as well, and it's important for people to be able to pass on in peace and not cause complete trauma to their loved ones when they go. You could make that argument too. But also, there's this real sense of inner knowing for people there, that the phrase I always use, which is the self beyond the self. I think it's a Jungian thing again, of being connected to something greater than yourself, a wisdom, whether it's within or without. It doesn't even matter to me, but it's there for you to draw on in these incredibly important moments in life.
Yeah, while you were talking, I was very much thinking of the Jungian approach to symbolism, and the notion that archetypes are universal symbols that transcend our own experience and make us part of this notion of a collective consciousness, and how death is one thing that is going to happen to all of us, and how there is a sharing of some of these symbols across cultures, which I found really fascinating from a Jungian point of view, and heartwarming. Actually, it almost underscores Jung's theory in this field of the notion of archetypes and collective consciousness. I thought it was really interesting. And I know you and I often talk about, and we're interested in dreaming as a form of consciousness, what actually is happening. I was particularly fascinated with the Buffalo work on what they call, and I love how they call it, end of life experiences and end of life visions, and that there is this almost melting of boundaries between the waking life and the dreaming life, and the slipping of consciousness as you move towards death, and how the visions that can occur in that space, that visionary experiences and dreaming experiences often meld together. And anybody who's been on a spiritual retreat will know this moment that you sort of, the boundaries of existence suddenly start fading and sort of merging into each other. And I found that particularly interesting, I must admit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's coming through in this context where they're so careful to make sure that it's not about medication, it's not about hallucination. The cognitive and sensory faculties are still there. So in many ways, apart from knowing that they're at the end of life, these are people like you and me having these experiences. And yeah, I think there's something really comforting in that. And it's definitely one word that came up for me again and again with it.
Yeah.
I get the impression in talking to Dr. Kerr that he's a man with a big heart as well as a big brain. And it seems like people who work in these environments and really pay attention and are really with people, that it changes them and it changes their lives in some way as well. It's really good to see.
Lovely. Thank you. Great interview. Thanks, Dave. Thank you to all the team at the Hospice at Buffalo and to Dr. Christopher Kerr. And if you want to read more about his work or buy his book or look at the Netflix series, we'll put some links, obviously, as always, in the show notes.
That's right. Thank you for listening. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.
So, thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show notes for links or find us on Instagram and on our Facebook page and on our website at driccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further or you would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £30 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for all of our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with latest dream research news, and we'll also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.